Thanks very much, Will, and good morning. It's great to be here in Perth with all of you, speaking with the mining community. I assume that most of you either are miners or work with miners on a regular basis, and it's not often that I get to do that because I'm stuck off in the East Coast, where we don't do nearly so much, particularly not in Canberra and Melbourne, which is where I tend to be. Remote Area Renewables was actually the first big ARENA initiative back in 2013, and it was all about displacing diesel in communities and in mines. And we've learned a lot since 2013, and I'm keen to give you a quick update on that. I'm impressed with your commitment to the sector, and I thank you for being here. I look forward to spending some time with you today. So renewables in mining has a long history in Australia. Yep, still there. It started out 124 years ago in 1893. This is a Tasmanian mine, Mount Bischoff nickel mine, which was powered by a hydroelectric facility. It's actually Tasmania, which those of you who are from Australia know is covered with hydro facilities today. It was Tasmania's first hydro facility, and it actually only powered the lights. But hey, that's all the electricity they needed in this mine at the time. Now, thanks to Will, he gave you probably enough background about ARENA for me not to have to go through it. But I did want to just take a step back before I dive into details and just ask or revisit, why was ARENA created in the first place? So back in 2012, it was created as a Commonwealth agency to bring the best renewable energy innovation to life by boosting knowledge, collaboration, and funding for renewable energy innovation. So we have, out of the $2 billion that Will mentioned, we have about a little over 700 million left for those purposes. We recently released a new set of priorities, which I'll just take you through very briefly. The first is delivering secure and reliable electricity. Second is accelerating solar PV innovation. That's all about R&D. Third is improving energy productivity, and the fourth is exporting renewable energy. The third one of those, the energy productivity one, aims to reduce emissions and energy costs across the building, transport, and industrial sectors by making energy use more productive. So that includes both renewable energy and associated energy efficiency. And that is the one that mining projects clearly fit into and are still a priority for ARENA to continue to invest in. But mining projects also fit into a couple of the other priorities. The first one, in the context of microgrids, and other ways of improving reliability and security of systems, are very much relevant to both small systems and large systems like the NEM, and we're keen to increase the transferability of and transference of knowledge from one to the other. The fourth priority I'll mention just briefly. It's a bit different, and this stems from the fact that today Australia exports almost 3/4 of its energy in the form of coal and natural gas. And if we assume that that isn't going to continue forever, and we want to remain an energy exporter, how would we do that? Turns out that Australia has the highest solar energy per capita as a resource, and it has one of the highest wind energy resources per capita globally. So if you imagine a future where we all live in a carbon-constrained world, if we could figure out how to leverage those renewables into an export industry, that would actually be quite interesting for the country. So how would we do that? Maybe it's through hydrogen, maybe it's ammonia or some other hydrogen carrier, but you could also think about it in the context of upgrading minerals. So instead of exporting crushed rock, we'd actually refine to an ore and export that, or even upgrading it to a metal. When you're talking, so that obviously applies to any really energy-intensive export that we have. So that's a different context in which you can think about ARENA support for as well. ARENA provides support in the form of grants, but we're very commercially oriented. Coming from a venture capital background, and my main partner in crime, Ian Kay, on the team is out of Macquarie Bank, so ex-project finance guy. We don't like to give money away, so we try to get as much of a return as we possibly can for our grant funding, and that is in the context of getting as much knowledge as possible, making as much progress towards a commercial outcome as possible. So that's very important to us. Sometimes we'll also structure grants so that they're recoupable, or we share risk, so that if the oil price goes up, renewables effectively become more commercially viable on their own, so maybe our grant goes down. So you can think about it in that kind of way too. So now I'll dive into a couple of case studies to give you a sense of what the unique bits of learning are that we have from this industry so far. So last year, as I flew into the Degussa copper mine, which is about 900 kilometers northeast of here, it's a Sandfire mine, Sandfire-owned mine. I was on the charter flight talking to the staff who were also flying in for their work week about the very large and highly visible solar plant that they have there. It's right next to the airport. And what became clear very quickly is that they're very proud of the environmental stewardship that their company has. So people feel differently about working for someone who shares their values, and that's increasingly important. And so I urge you to consider that aspect of actually diving into this space and being involved in it. It, of course, isn't the whole business case, and the business case tends to revolve around reducing risk. So it's the risk related to cost. When you build a renewables project, the cost is all up front, so you know what your energy cost is going to be for a long time to come. It's about social license, and not only with staff, but also with investors, with the broader community. And it's the risk of some sort of tightened carbon regulatory mechanism that will likely appear someday in the future. And I know many of you, or many of the miners, already do shadow carbon pricing, but what we've found is that it's not enough to simply consider the cost of carbon in decision making. There actually are processes to be learned and organizational changes to be made and technical issues to sort through by actually doing a project. A lot of the learning is in the doing. Now, Degussa was a very ambitious project. It's 10.6 megawatts with substantial integrated battery storage. At peak solar output, it's very high penetration renewables, so it almost gets to 100% of the load of the mine, and the diesels end up operating at a fairly low capacity factor for the sunny parts of the day. And there definitely were some hiccups along the way. There were technical issues both in the commissioning and after commissioning, and happily those have been worked through, and the system is now fully functioning and up and running exactly as intended. Earlier this week, more than 60 people, and I'm guessing many of you are here, from across the mining sector went to the project. They came from all over Australia, as well as from Hong Kong, Singapore, and Spain to see the project and to learn from it. So Sandfire obviously gets tremendous kudos from that sort of event, but I want to come back to how it helps them and others like them to mitigate the risk by actually going through the project and dealing with those technical hiccups, it makes it much easier to do the next one. If there were a forcing mechanism, cost or regulation, social license to do more of these projects, they'd have a very long head start. They'd know exactly what to do. It also helps them a lot in the context of a new mine. It becomes much easier to convince the regulator that you actually do genuinely care about environmental issues and that you are going to take remediation seriously when you've already blazed a trail with renewable energy, for example. Now, they jumped in, Degussa, Sandfire in the Degussa case jumped in with both feet in a big way with an ambitious project. However, others have done renewables at a much smaller scale. If you're going to 10 or 20% penetration in a fossil fuel powered system with solar or wind, it really is very low risk from a technical perspective. There are still some, but there are not many risks. However, there are still issues to work through, which makes it worthwhile. One example, a project that ARENA worked on together with a big miner, it took the mining company more than 2 years to get through its own internal approvals for a fairly modest-sized solar project. The same size diesel generator would have taken less than a month and been signed off with a standard form. So again, it just illustrates some of the learning that can come from going through the process and simply engaging at some level. So we're getting to the point where the risk of not doing anything, not engaging in this space, is becoming rather higher than simply getting in there and starting to work on something, even if it's only an investigation of a project. And that'll enable you, once done, to mitigate risks around cost, social license, and carbon regulation, among other areas. Now, I'd like to just speak very briefly about Will's project from Laing O'Rourke, because it mitigates a risk that's very particular to the mining sector, and that is around project life. So we know that often mines have a short life, and you don't really know whether it's going to be extended or for how long it's going to be extended. Problem, as I mentioned earlier, is that renewable projects, all the cost is up front, then the longer you keep it, the cheaper it gets. By having a redeployable solar farm that comes containerized as a complete system with all the control systems, it comes with a generator, you can have batteries with it if you want, all the cabling, it can be set up in days and then taken away again. It really does mitigate that risk pretty dramatically. There are plenty more leadership opportunities that ARENA would be keen to support in this sector. I'll just give you a couple of examples. One is around managing variable output from renewable energy, particularly at a very high penetration level where you get to the point of actually being able to turn the diesel or the gas off. And what this entails is taking all the components, so the storage, the demand response, the fossil fuel powered energy, the forecast output of renewable energy, as well as the forecast load, and integrating it all into the one system so that it is fully reliable and fully secure. So we've actually done this in the community sector at some scale. King Island is an example that many of you know. It integrates wind, solar, diesel. The diesel has a flywheel, so the engine can be turned off, but it continues to spin, can be started back up very quickly. Has batteries. It even has a big resistor in case there's a temporary current surge so that no components in the system get fried. It incorporates demand management out in the community. There's very modest industry on King Island, and so we're keen to actually test it in a real industrial setting, this kind of system. It's getting improved on Flinders Island, and a similar system is getting put in for Cooper-Pedy. And so these off-grid, fully integrated, very high penetration systems are getting rolled out. We'd now like to actually try it out in a mining context. Another area that's ripe for innovation that involves no technical risk whatsoever is around contracting. So this is power purchase agreements. A power purchase agreement is contracting directly with a power producer as the user. Now, you say, duh, in the mining industry, this is situation normal. And it is in the off-grid sector. It's less normal on-grid, and I'm here to tell you that it is very, very uncommon among industry and corporates more generally in Australia. It is taking off in the US, so many gigawatts of renewable capacity have been contracted directly with corporate entities there, and it's done primarily to reduce cost. Not only has it not been done in Australia, but even for the mining community, I think what would be relatively new is to have multiple PPAs for the supply of energy into the one facility. But again, that's quite doable. In Australia, Telstra has taken the leap. This is a quote from Telstra's head of energy, Ben Burge, and the commodities he's referring to there are carbon and electricity. They've just contracted for a 70 megawatt solar farm up in Queensland. Similarly, Sun Metals, which is a zinc refinery up in Queensland, is currently constructing a 116 megawatt solar farm for its own use. Now, when you're thinking about diving into this space, it's helpful to just have a sense of the global context. There are now quite a few projects globally that incorporate renewables into mining at some scale. When we started in 2013, there were just two projects, the Diavik diamond mine up in North Canada and another one in Cronimet down in South Africa. Most of these projects are very happy to talk and share knowledge. They don't regard energy as a primary competitive advantage, but that may change. So again, another reason to get moving. It's an interesting project I'll just mention very briefly, big solar thermal project in Chile, which is currently the only way you can get reliable 24/7 renewable energy into an industrial setting. However, it is still really expensive. So where do we go from here? ARENA has a unique vantage point. We're designed and we exist to help provide the funding, to catalyze the networking and the collaboration, and to distribute the knowledge in this sector. Specifically for the mining industry, our work presents opportunities to reduce the risk of deployment and to reduce the cost of deployment to the point where it actually has become riskier to not engage in this space. So talk to our team that's here over the 2 days. We have a booth. If you can maybe put up your hand if you're associated with ARENA, and I'm seeing some people who are loosely associated, like Paul over here. Chris, Steve, and Katie. Yep, I can see some hands waving around. So we can help you figure out what you need to get into this space. To learn from our project specifically, we have a big data component to what we do. So we collect data, we anonymize it, we give it back out. We can help you with that process, both the collection aspect and the use of the data. We recently commissioned a handbook. It's called Hybrid Power Generation for Australian Off-Grid Mines. So it takes and collates our key learning for how to plan and build a renewable energy project on a mine site. And it's based on our experience as well as a lot of industry interviews. We have a draft that's available at our booth, so we encourage you to go over there and pick it up and give us some comments. We want to hear your feedback because ultimately our goal is to help you innovate energy so as to bring renewables to your organization, to your mine. And so tell us what works, what doesn't work, what more do you need to know, and we'll attempt to provide it to you. Thanks very much.